Hello and welcome to another Developer Essentials. So this time around we're going to be taking a look at gizmos and a related area, handles. So these are a technique that allows us to add things into the scene view and allows us to, in particular, where we can use this is for adding in things like debug information, stuff like that. So super handy, really great way for being able to make our classes, objects, a lot easier to be able to be working with. So let's dive right on in. And so we've already set up, we've got a couple of objects in our scene, and we've also already got a couple of classes. So the cube, I'm going to give that the Gizmos demo script. And we're going to then take a look at the kinds of things we can set up with this. So we have access to a couple of key functions that we have to use for working with gizmos. So one of the ones is on draw gizmos, and the other one is very similarly named, but is on draw gizmos selected. So we'll see what the difference is between how these work. So what I'm going to do is in on draw gizmos, I am just going to make this, so the way these work is we do gizmos dot, then we can change the color. So I'm going to set the color, for example, to magenta. So in on draw gizmos, I'm going to say then gizmos dot draw. You can see we've got a bunch of different ones. We can be drawing things like frustum planes, we can draw a cube, got things like textures and icons, lines, rays, a whole bunch of different ones that we can actually be drawing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a wire sphere, and so I'm going to make it the center is my transform position, and let's say that the radius, well, what we'll do is maybe this is handling like explosions, for example. So float, let's have an effect radius. It's equal to 4. And then I'm going to bring that down here. So that looks pretty good. And then let's just see immediately what we get in the scene view. So we can see we get our sphere being drawn. It's drawn whether it's selected or not. As we change the effect radius, this changes. So really, really handy to be able to know, is this going to actually be impacting on something? So super handy in that regard. Now we could then go and in on draw gizmos selected, we could be actually doing other things here. So for example, what we could be doing is when it's selected, we could say, okay, gizmos color, let's set the color to white, and let's draw a ray or a line. So we could do either. In this case, we'll draw a line from transform.position. Let's draw a line to transform then dot position plus vector 3 dot up. Actually, a new vector 3 will say, makes it a little bit easier. Let's do 1, 1, 1. Now, this doesn't have any particular meaning for the type of thing that we're actually working with here. This is just purely as a handy thing for being able to draw a bunch of lines, just to illustrate what's actually happening here with all of this. So the key thing is these lines will only draw when I have that selected. So as soon as it's not selected, can't see it. As soon as I select it, then it will be shown. So this would allow me to, for example, put more intensive things only there when it's selected, and less intensive things when it's just actually ambiently present in the scene. Under the gizmos here, we would then actually typically be able to then control whether those are actually being shown. So we've got our gizmos demo one here, so we can turn those off and on, so those will appear. We can see different icons, things like that we can mess with. So really handy, makes it really easy for being able to provide extra debug displays there. I use this a lot where, for example, if I've got a chain of things that I'm drawing, so for example I might have something that is managing piping, and those pipes I want to just draw a debug display showing the direction that it's worked out that things are connected to. So I can easily just draw lines between all of them. So really, really handy for being able to draw information like of that, as well as having our solid wire spheres. We also have the alternative of, we could do draw sphere, again transform.position, and again our effect radius. But in this case, let's say what we did was gizmos.color is equal to new color, and we'll make it 1, 0, 1, and we'll provide a little bit of transparency. And then once that's drawing, you can see we do have the transparency is happening there. And the gizmos do add a little bit of overhead, but they're generally pretty cheap from the fact that we can see with this sphere that's being drawn, it's very low resolution. It's a very small number of polys that are being used for it, which is going to mean that it's quite fast for actually drawing. So we've got a lot of different drawing functions that we can be using there. We can only see those gizmos though in the inspector. So we're in the scene view, so only in the scene view. We don't see those in the game view, which is fine. We don't need to see them in the game view. But the key thing is they're really handy for being able to debug things. So highly recommend making use of gizmos. You can, while we're working with gizmos, we can actually still check things like our camera position. So that's a way where we can make it that we only draw stuff if we're really near to things. So we could be checking f vector 3 distance of camera.main.position or transform dot position. That distance to our position is less than, say it's less than 50. Actually, we'll check if it's greater than it and then exit out. So that allows us to only draw stuff when we're really close to it. So if we do need to have a high density of information, for example, if we needed stuff that was having to display everywhere, then we would actually be able to filter that out. Now that is going to be going based off of this camera, which is handy. We can have that as it's tying to as the player's moving around. So that might be a particular thing that we're wanting to be doing there. We also, if we're wanting to, we could be referring to the editor and working out where its camera is actually located. So if we wanted to access the camera from this particular scene, what we can do is, there's a thing called scene view, which to access that we need the Unity editor. So because we want to make sure this is safe for in a build, we're going to do f Unity editor, and if. I just like doing the end if and putting in the comment here just to make it clear what it's tying into. Works well if you've got lots of nested ones of the if statements. So we're going to use Unity editor. So with the Unity editor added in, we can then access our scene view dot camera, and we can bring that to here, And that will allow us to check this. Now, it is currently getting grumpy at us. It is publicly accessible. So we'll just go back to the Unity inspector. And so it's wanting a particular reference. So what we may need to do is get the current scene view, then we can access the camera. So we can set up just a temporary variable here, scene camera, because then we can check the scene camera's transform position. So this will then be going off of the camera that's being used for the scene view here. We'll see that it disappears. But then once we get closer, it appears. We could even go a little bit further and say, okay, well, application, we can check if it's playing. So if it's playing, we could use camera.main. Otherwise, we use the scene views camera. So now we have something where when we are just testing in the editor, it's going to be going off of where the scene view camera is located. But as soon as I go and play, it's going to be tied into this camera. So when this one moves far away. So that could be a handy way for us being able to sort of test things that might need to be local to each one. Now, because we did put in this Unity editor and we are using some Unity editor specific things, this is something where I would highly recommend doing this, just so we don't run into any issues with building it. So there we go. And we'll just test that our functionality is still working the way that we're after it. So we get close. So if we then go to play, should still be visible, but when we move far away, disappears. So it's a way of making our gizmos react a bit based upon where the camera is located. Really handy for if you've got a lot of density of gizmos and you're wanting to actually constrain it a bit, so you're wanting to make it that it's not showing too much in the way of data there, it's not bogging down performance. We also, as we saw, this is directly referring to variables, so we could set up Booleans here, that those Booleans, based upon what we've set, control what bits of information are shown here. Main thing is just be mindful of the fact of what stuff you're doing, and on draw gizmos is going to be happening every single frame. And on draw gizmos selected is going to happen every single frame when we have this particular thing selected in the hierarchy. So there is potential for overhead there, so we do want to be mindful of potential performance impacts. So keep that in mind. Use things like only drawing stuff when we're within a particular range is going to make it a lot more efficient and give a lot more room for being able to show useful information. So that's our gizmos. Gizmos are really handy for stuff like that. But as we saw, the range of things we can draw with a gizmo is quite limited. It's quite limited in terms of the things that we can actually draw there. Handles allow us to draw a little bit more, but handles require a little bit of a different sort of setup. So we still need to use some similar stuff to before, where again, Unity editor, so end Unity editor, and then we can bring in using Unity editor. Then we actually set up a custom editor. So we'll put that again inside our usual setups here. So we create a custom editor, and this will allow us to then draw those handles if we need to. So we set up the usual of, this is a custom editor. It's a custom editor for handles demo. And then when we set this up, so handles demo editor, and it comes off of editor. So So this, our function we use for it is onScene GUI. So this is for drawing stuff in the scene view. We use the onScene GUI. And then the handles, so we need to grab the particular object because we've got a completely separate class here, but that's okay because we can access that. So we have our linked object, so we can retrieve. We have target as handles demo. So that means now we could access any particular properties on this. So if I had something like this, public float range is equal to 5, then I'd be able to access that. And so handles, we can do stuff where, okay, well, handles, color, and that's going to be color, let's go for green. And then we can see we've got a wider range of draw options. So we have similar ones in terms of being able to draw lines, but we also, with handles, we can draw dotted lines, we can draw a polygon line, we can draw solid arcs, things like that, we can draw discs, lots of different things that we can actually draw. And if you've seen the AI demo, one of the things, and actually the sensor demo, that uses drawing of arcs and discs to be able to indicate the relative zones for being able to hear and see things, as well as also proximity detection. So for example, I could draw a solid disc and I can give it my center position, which that's going to be the linked objects transform position. Then I can give it the normal, which I want it to be, in this case, if I want it to be, I could have it the world up, or I could orient it based upon the disk. In this case, I want it to be the world up. So I'm going to say vector3.up. And then the radius is going to be linked object and range. So let's take a look at that and see what we get. So with this, so the thing with handles is they won't draw immediately. We need to have the thing typically selected, and let's put my handles demo script on there so we can see it's being drawn. As soon as I deselect it, it won't be drawn. And as soon as I reselect it, then it's going to be drawn. And it's drawing it at the current position. It's drawing it. It potentially can end up drawing over the top of the geometry for the object, as we can see in this case. The render order there, the handles do draw in front. With this, we can then change the range, and it's immediately changing the particular one. So we could have used handles for our setup here with the cube for drawing the particular range there. That would have been an available option there if we wanted to. So that would have been an option. Now with handles, we can draw a lot of different things and different things that we can draw with gizmos. The catch being that handles are only going to be accessible when we have the particular thing selected. So handles, they don't just draw additional information like of this, they also can actually be used for interactions with things, because we've seen here these grabbers, those are handles. So we actually can draw our own particular ones for those. So we have a range of different ones available to us. So if we take a look and see what we can actually do with this, we can do something like, for example, if we go for handles and radius handle. Now this, it's functioning very similar to our custom inspectors. It's an immediate mode GUI is what we're working with here. So our rotation, well, rotation is going to be the identity. We could get the rotation of the object, but I think identity fits with how we're actually working with this. We can then have our position, so the center of the handle, which is the linked objects transform position. Our current radius, linked object dot radius range. And then whether it's actually drawing the points for it or not. So in this case, I'm going to go with false. So that returns a new radius. So linked object dot range is equal to this. Now what I will do is I will then comment out the drawing of the solid disk, because we don't want that actually drawing. Now we do need to do a little bit of stuff for checking if things have changed. So what we do is an editor GUI begin change check. That starts it looking to see has something actually been changed. Then what we would do is, okay, f editor GUI dot end change check. So that will return true if stuff was changed. And then we can tell it stuff was actually modified. So we would, just as a setup here, we'd have new range. So we'd say record object, we give it the target. We could provide linked object target is also fine. So update range, and then we would actually make the change of linked object dot range is equal to new range. So let's check this and see what this looks like, how this behaves. So now we can see it's being drawn here, and if we drag this, you can see in the inspector the range is changing and we get the visual changing. So gizmos purely are for display purposes. Handles can display and do display information, but we can also use them for modification purposes. So we can use them to allow us to be able to modify things where, in this case, if we're dealing with an effect range, I can just go like this, and okay, cool, now I know that that cube is encompassed. So it makes it really handy for working with it. And we see them a lot. Things like of our colliders use that exact same one in this case as an easy way of working with it. And so we do have quite a few things under the handles. If we search for handles dot handle, you can see we've got things like our handles for scale, for radius, lots of different ones that are available there. Rotations for drawing things like the transform positions. So if you're needing to be able to modify some of your particular values, you can easily set up a handle for it. Key thing when you're working with handles is to remember that we do need to put stuff in its own Unity editor things, because it does contain code that is absolutely not going to run in a build. We also need to make sure that we're properly checking to see if things have changed so that we can work out if we need to undo things. So gizmos and handles, two super powerful things for being able to add additional debugging information to our projects, or improved ways of being able to customize, to work with, to build up our particular projects. So gizmos we use purely for information output. We can draw lines and spheres and filled ones and wireframe ones, can draw icons and textures. We can check things like our camera. So we saw an easy way we could check and see, switch between using the actual game camera when it's playing versus using the scene view camera, which could be really handy. We also saw the difference between draw gizmos and draw gizmos selected. So on draw gizmos runs regardless of whether it's selected or not, so it's a constant hit. Whereas on draw gizmos selected, we have to actually select the object for it to be causing a hit there. So a little bit better performance. We generally would hide any slower stuff in on draw gizmos selected. But again, we can still be doing those tests of where the camera is, even where the camera is looking, to filter out what stuff we're trying to draw. Handles, we saw had a different range of drawing options, a few more drawing options actually. And the big thing with handles is they allow us to have interaction from the user, so that we can just change a radius, so that we can easily customize that appearance there quite effectively, and we can tie it into a property. The key things we need to remember is, because we're actually now modifying an object in the editor, we have to do a few extra little things, these begin and end change checks, to ensure that we're going through the undo system, so that Unity knows that we've changed things. Otherwise, that data is not going to reliably be saved out, and in most cases won't be saved out, so we can lose information. And this also means that I can change something and then I can undo it. So we need to do that little bit of extra steps to go through, but the payoff is we get something that allows us to really easily customize and control things there in the inspector, in the scene view there, which is really handy. Makes it very easy for working with stuff rather than trying to guess values. We can test the stuff visually, which is great. So the code for this project, as with all of the projects, it is available up on GitHub. You are free to use that code from this project, from any of the projects there, in any of your own projects, and whether those are commercial or non-commercial ones, you can be using it. And any of the assets, if they're ones that I've built up in the projects, are also freely available for use there. If you found the video helpful, please do chuck in a like and subscribe. It really does help out. If you've got any questions, then chuck in a comment. If you've used the code in a project, and you just want to chuck in a link to stuff you've worked on, we'd love to be hearing of how you've used any of the code for the projects. And if you're looking for other ways to support the channel, I do have a Patreon set up, and the link for that is in the description below. Bye.